Hi, I'm Steffany Strange. Want to hear something scary?
Marley could feel it before she opened the door. Something dropped in her stomach as she reached for the doorknob, protesting, begging her to turn away and leave. I hate that tree, Marley thought as she walked into her house. She aggressively approached the blinking lights before she could even close the door. Green, red, orange, blue, white. Blinking fast, then slowly, then fast again because her mother hadn't set the speed. She just left the lights to cycle through whatever the factory setting was. Marley knew they were Christmas lights, but they felt like eyes when she came into the room and saw them changing color while she watched, almost like they were blinking at her. Blinking at her from behind these gaudy Christmas ornaments clustered in front, ornaments that almost drowned out the consistent blinking. Almost. Marley groaned as she walked in, unable to pull her eyes away from the monstrosity, the monster. She eyed it, and from somewhere beneath the lights and ornaments and tinsel, it stared right back at her. Marley walked toward the tree, deeper into the living room, scattered with the storage bins that held those offensive ornaments and other collective tree trash for most of the year. Her shoulders instinctively raising with every step. She didn't feel it happening, but knew what was going on. Marley was preparing herself to fight, preparing herself for battle. Because it was in there. And this year, she was going to get it out. The wind whipped outside the open front door, pushing in the cold air and letting out the warmth. But Marley didn't even feel the chill in the air. She threw her backpack to the floor. She needed her hands free for what was to come. Marley's chest heaved as the tree vibrated. The tree reached out to Marley, surprising her. She craned her neck, cringing, spine arching, desperate not to feel the coarse bristles against her skin as the branches elongated, stretched their plastic tips towards Marley's face. Her feet tangled beneath her, and she shrieked in a surprise as she fell, a sound she wished she hadn't made. Now her mother would come to see what was wrong. Her mother would come and ask why the door was open. Her mother would see what lived in the tree, and it would go after her too. Its bloody mouth spread into a smile, as if it could read Marley's thoughts. Marley could see its eyes now, set deep in the thick of the fake tree that was older than she was. Marley knew her mother had played Christmas songs by Johnny Mathis and drank wine as she trimmed the tree just like she did every year. And just like every year before that one, the beast in the tree woke up, blinked its hateful eyes, and waited. For what? Marley didn't know. Maybe for Marley to get too close so it could stick its metal fasteners in one of her eyes, or scratch her face as she reached for presents. Her mother never seemed to notice. Maybe, Marley had time to wonder, it was just waiting for me. Marley's hair pulled from her scalp as a branch she hadn't noticed wound itself around a few braids. Enough to hurt, enough to trap her. Marley wanted to scream, wanted to open her mouth and call for help, but the branches pressed into her mouth, ripping her tongue from her jaw and diving through the tunnel of her throat to strangle her breath. Some of the tinsel on the lower branches was knocked loose and tangled itself in Marley's hair as she was dragged under it, into it. It was a perfect wrapping for the perfect gift. Joanne came from the basement with another bin full of ornaments and put them on the floor in front of the tree. She stood straight, placed her hands on her hips, tired from walking up the stairs, mostly, but almost because there really wasn't any more room for more ornaments. She plumped the limbs, marveling at how such an old tree could still look so brand new, full and flush like she felt after a satisfying meal. Then she spotted it. Maybe there was room for a few more, Joanne thought as she smiled. Right there, where Marley dropped her bag.
In 2001, 14-year-old Leah, her brother, his girlfriend, and their parents traveled to Paris, France to visit Leah's grandfather. He lived alone in a 3-bedroom flat, a block away from the Luxembourg Gardens. The apartment was covered in antiques, from old paintings to vintage furniture. Her grandfather loved collecting items with a history. Leah and her mother stayed in one of the bedrooms together. Their first night in that room, her mother fell asleep before her. Once her snoring had stopped, she began whimpering. It looked as if she was crying in her sleep. Leah wasn't sure what to do, but it looked like her mother was hurting, so she lightly tapped her on the shoulder. She woke up with a gasp, assured Leah that she was fine, and went back to sleep. On the second night, Leah was awoken by what felt like an earthquake. She tried to turn to her mom to ask her if she felt it too, but she couldn't move. She could see her mom right next to her in the corner of her eye, but no matter how hard she struggled, she couldn't move her head. She tried to scream, but nothing came out. After what felt like hours, Leah was awoken again by her mother nudging her shoulder. Leah's brother and his girlfriend, Jen, stayed in a different room. Jen was a very devout Catholic. She wore a cross around her neck and wrapped one of her purses with a large rosary. One night during the trip, she woke up and saw a blonde woman standing over her. Jen couldn't move. After minutes of struggling, she woke up, clutching the cross around her neck. The blonde woman was nowhere to be found. She sat up to catch her breath and looked over at her purse. The rosary had been removed. The next morning, everybody met in the living room while Leah's grandfather prepared breakfast in the kitchen. Jen was looking at some of the decor in the room and gasped. She pointed at a small painting hanging on the wall. That woman. I saw that woman in my dream last night. Leah and her mother walked over to the painting. Oh my God, I saw her too. The first night we were here, I woke up in the middle of the night and she was in our room. She was standing over you and said, "Can I touch her?" And I kept trying to tell her no, but I couldn't move. And then you woke me up. I think I saw her too, Leah said. I was brushing my hair in front of that old vanity in our room, and it started to feel like someone was standing behind me. The mirror is a little splotchy, but I could have sworn I saw a face slowly start to form in the mirror, but I ran out of there before I could find out. Leah's grandfather walked in carrying a tray with coffee. Grandpa, who's the woman in this painting? Oh, that's Marie. She owned this place before passing away a few years ago. The room that you and your mother are sleeping in was hers, actually. Why do you ask? They decided not to tell him about their experiences since he lived alone and they didn't want to scare him. Later that day, Leah and her family began to pack their things and prepare for their flight home. Her grandfather pulled her aside and said, "I want to show you something." She followed him into a room where he pulled out a beautiful jewelry box. Inside was a collection of intricate ivory hair pieces and combs. Do you want them? I feel like you'd really like them. They belong to Marie. Please, take them. His insistence weirded her out a little bit, and she politely declined. After that trip, Leah's mother came up with a theory that Marie really took a liking to Leah, and it was probably her who was subconsciously telling her grandpa to give her the jewelry box as a parting gift. So, the next time they visited the flat, her mother spoke to Marie. "Hi, we're here. Look, we enjoy visiting, but we won't come back if you keep doing things to scare us." And ever since then, no one in the family experienced anything strange in that house.
It was a hard winter, made even harder for Daphne and her sister Amira by the relentless bullying they received on their walks to school each day. They were constantly ambushed by bullies who would pelt them with snowballs packed with rocks. Sometimes, they would take their backpacks and empty them into the street. The worst bully was Keith, who made sure to take the girls' lunches each day. They had had enough. They snuck into their grandmother's room and took one of her forbidden books. It was a book that gave them instructions on how to build a mystical guardian, otherwise known as a golem. In ancient times, their Jewish ancestors were said to have constructed golems out of clay or mud for protection. Building a golem was no easy task, but they felt like they had no other option. Because it was winter and the ground was frozen and covered in snow, they had trouble finding clay, so the two decided to mix in some snow and build a giant snowman that would hopefully work as their golem. The sisters walked in a circle around the snowman and chanted the ancient words from their grandmother's book. Then, Amira hoisted Daphne on her shoulders so the girl could etch the secret symbols onto the snowman's forehead. Finally, they held hands and stood before their snowman golem and gave it its mission: punish all bullies. And then they waited. But nothing happened. Disheartened, they headed home. Daphne and Amira's walk to school the next day was shockingly uneventful. No one bothered them, and in fact, the kids that normally bullied them seemed to avoid the girls completely. That is, until they got to Keith. Keith demanded their lunches, and Daphne and Amira sighed and opened their backpacks, resigned to another day of bullying. Keith then took their lunch bags and emptied them onto the ground. He looked them in the eye as he stomped on their food. Tears welled up in their eyes, and just as Keith began to laugh at them, a snowball the size of a basketball plowed him in the head and knocked him off his feet. The girls turned to see where the snowball had come from and found their snow golem standing not too far behind them, unmoving. Keith was furious. He pushed himself up off the ground and balled his fists. Then he looked around to see who would have dared to do that. He marched past the girls, and as he neared the snowman, it jerked to life and lifted him off the ground. Daphne begged the golem not to hurt Keith, but Amira laughed and cheered as the creature tossed the boy effortlessly across the street and into a snowbank. Keith was shaken as he got back on his feet and ran away. Daphne looked once again at the unmoving snowman and her cheering sister. She wondered that she and her sister had gone too far. The next day, Daphne found her sister at lunch, standing by a trash can with a malicious smile on her face. Inside the trash can was a lot of uneaten food and also books. Daphne accused her sister of being a bully just like Keith and his friends. "This isn't bullying. This is revenge," Amira exclaimed. On the walk home, none of the bullies would make eye contact with the sisters, including Keith, who ran across the street to avoid them. When Daphne asked Amira about it, she told her not to worry. But just as the girls turned the corner, they found their snowman golem towering over them. The girls took a step back as it raised its monstrous hand and pointed an icy finger at Amira. The snow parted where a mouth would be and let loose in a voice that sounded like gravel scraping against ice.
"Punish all bullies."
The girls ran as fast as they could to get away from their monster. But every time they looked back, it was lumbering closer. Then it palmed Amira's head and lifted her off the ground. Daphne knew it was planning to toss her sister like it did Keith, but there was no snowbank to break her fall, only icy roads and jagged trees. Daphne had to act fast. As the lumbering snowman held her sister's head and ready to throw her, Daphne quickly made a snowball and took aim. The snowball smashed into the secret symbols on the golem's forehead, disconnecting the creature from its mystical power. The golem fell into a pile, and Amira landed on top, completely unnerved and fully aware of how close she had been to death. As the terrified girls stumbled away, neither noticed that snow landed on the scuffed marks on the golem's forehead. The ancient marks slowly started to reform as it started to take shape again. A golem must complete its purpose once made. Neither Daphne or Amira warranted its attention again, but now it was loose on the world, and one desire burned within its icy heart.
Punish all bullies.
Thanks so much for listening. Like and share if this video gave you the chills. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell for notifications. See you next time.